Welcome to the Paru Zings, Appraisers on Purpose podcast. This podcast showcases inspiring appraisers and professionals from the industry who are leaders in their field. How did they get to where they are? What have they learned along the way? And what do they do now for their teams, their clients, and the industry? Your host is real estate investor, entrepreneur, and appraiser, Michael Hobbs.
Welcome back. Oh, so glad that you're joining us for this session here in Season 2. We are really excited to have another talented and accomplished industry peer to share his perspective on the profession and a lot of different opportunities that he's been a part of over the last number of years. And again, we want to thank you, our listeners, because it's your feedback, it's your encouragement, and it's really your excitement over getting a sense of what's possible and what other people have accomplished that keeps this podcast going. So keep sharing, keep liking it, and keep offering your positive feedback and things or people you'd love to hear from that have been at that industry for a period of time and have had a big impact on where we're at and where we're going. With that, I'm so excited that Rick Garrie is joining us. Rick, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. And really, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, we appreciate it. You're a fascinating gentleman with a great history. And I think a lot of people may not know you, but you really have a lot of positive influence in the profession, and I'm grateful for you to make some time and join us here for this fun chat we'll have for the next hour or so.
Great.
And Rick, you know the opening question. So were you born this way? How'd you get into the profession?
I was not born this way. So,
well, tell us. Do tell.
I've got to go way back to start this story.
You and me both, man. We've been around a little while.
Before my appraising career, I've got to go way back before that. So when I was younger in high school, very shy person, didn't get out a whole lot. I grew up in a small town outside of Kansas City.
How small is small, Rick? I think that kind of helps people because not everybody's from a big city like Kansas City or Chicago. Did you have a stoplight or a go light in your town?
And when I grew up, we had the main intersection was a four-way stop. We had about 7,000 people.
Okay, so that's kind of on the small side.
So, and it was, I couldn't even find my way to Kansas City, driving or anything. And so I graduated high school and tried college. Didn't work for me. I spent a semester.
Rick, I'm just curious because some people will definitely appreciate this. You're in high school. You got a town of 7,000 people. Were there 10 people in your class?
We actually had 184 in our class.
In your class or in high school?
Well, that was in high school. So we had about maybe 80 in our class.
Yeah. It really helps people get a sense of that of small community feel. I mean, my family's from backwater Kentucky, and I very much understand what you're talking about. A lot of people can't put their mind around that. They're like, I had that many people in my homeroom class. That's your whole school. That's crazy. So I appreciate you sharing that. So you gave it a run, and after high school, it's like that next step's not for me. Huh?
Yeah, I spent a semester in college, and another thing about me is that in high school, math, I didn't do math. The highest level of math I ever took was consumer math, which you balance the checkbook. A lot of our listeners here probably don't know what balancing a checkbook is, but
that's so important. Thank goodness you knew how to do it. You didn't just assume that it was like, oh, what's that all about? I love it. Consumer math.
The semester that I took in community college, one of the things I took was algebra, and it was probably the most beneficial math class I've ever taken in my life.
Oh, wow.
And I didn't even make it through it. I dropped out before the end of the semester. So, my math background was very, very limited. I hated math, didn't like it. It was horrible. I went from there and wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do. I had been talking to the Marines and decided that's not where I want to go, but they kept pushing. So I went to talk to an Air Force recruiter to get them off my back, say, oh, I'm talking to an Air Force recruiter. The guy was great because I started talking to him. Next thing I know, I'm on a plane heading for boot camp.
Wow.
I don't even
talk about conversion story. I mean, you basically, we start a conversation and next thing you know, on an airplane.
Yeah. And so, in his field, I was supposed to, there was an Air Force base about 3 hours from where we live, Whiteman Air Force Base. I could request that. I probably get to go there. Everything's good. Make it through most of basic training. Towards the end, they give us our assignment. I'm going to Spain. Torrejon, Spain, just outside of Madrid. I'm like,
holy smokes, that's not 3 hours away from a small town in Kansas.
No, and that is from a guy who couldn't drive from our small town 30 minutes north to get into Kansas City. And, at that point in my life, the farthest I'd ever been was Chicago to visit my grandma. So I go to Spain. I'm there for 2 years. In there, I got to visit a lot of places, got to go to the Middle East, spent 3 months in Italy, probably the most life-changing portion of my life. It was fantastic. I absolutely loved it. Got to see Europe as a tourist, but also as a local. It was amazing. And I worked on planes, and, my plan was to go through, do that. That was going to be my career. I come out, go to work for an airline. That's what I was going to do the rest of my life. So I get out of the Air Force.
Rick,
yeah.
Should we be conducting this in Spanish instead of English? I mean, I apologize. I didn't even think to ask you that. I was kind of a little narrow-minded.
That was 30 years ago. So the only Spanish that I remember is probably not appropriate for a podcast.
We probably will stay in English, though. I appreciate that one.
Yeah. So I come out of the Air Force and I had, start looking around and come find out there's more that you need than just the Air Force experience. I had to have, certain license, everything. This wasn't going to work out for me. I just, again, here I find myself at a crossroad. But, I had the experience of the Air Force and working on those planes. And, when they trust an 18-year-old with a, $10 million plane, you're able to do things differently then. You have a confidence that you didn't have before. So my dad was actually security director for House of Lloyd. There was like 3 warehouses in Kansas City, and he got me a job there working in telecommunications and maintenance. So I worked there for a few years, just wasn't quite my, where I wanted to be, wasn't sure again what I wanted to do. And my mom was actually the deputy assessor for Cass County, that small county that I lived in. And this is kind of how my career is going to go. One day I'm in there, I'm visiting her. He calls me and says, "Hey, you looking for a job?" I said, "Sure." He goes, "I've got a appraiser position open if you want it." And again, I'm thinking, here's a career.
You're like, I'm an airplane mechanic. Yeah. Of course I can do appraisal.
Yeah. So I had no idea what it was, and so I started with the county as an appraiser, mass appraising.
Okay.
I took my first courses there, because the county was paying for them. I took the IAAO courses. Best one I ever took was a cadastral mapping course. And it was the first
Say a little more about that, because most people have no idea the word you just said.
I went in, it was a week-long course, and they taught you how to read a legal description and the different kinds of legal descriptions, the meets and bounds, the lot and block, taught you all that. And at the end of the course, they gave you long legal descriptions with the compass and everything, and you drew them out on a map. Something that I still use to this day. I can take a legal description, I can read it, and because we all know that there's times when legals don't, something was recorded wrong, something, isn't quite right. You can't, something just doesn't mesh up. It was fascinating. I absolutely loved it. So I worked there for 4 years. This is back in the early 90s. And
what kind of work does someone do who's starting out at an assessor office, and how does that progress over 4 years of being there?
Well, my progression wasn't a whole lot. Most of my time was spent just inspecting. We'd reevaluate properties. We'd go out, we'd take photos. I'd measure new construction, do all that. I did get a little bit involved in the mass appraisal part where you put the algorithms together, you submit it to the state, and appeals. I was in on appeals where they brought an appraiser in. At the time, I knew nothing. So when they brought an appraisal in, yeah, sure, he's right. Type of thing. I don't know. But, this is what our algorithm says.
I get it.
But I got the basics in there, in that there were differences in condition, there were differences in upgrades, quality, things like that, because mass appraising deals more in physical characteristics and algorithms and not so much in the more subjective things that we deal with in appraising. So, I started to get a little bit of exposure there.
Yes.
So I was coming to the end of my 4th year, and decided, it was time. I wanted to, really launch my career, because what I was doing, I had learned was not really appraising. It was different. There were some attributes to it, but to get into appraising, I talked to some appraisers. At that time, appraisers still came in the assessor's office, and they made copies.
Wasn't a cool concept? They actually, a human being came into an office and spoke to you, and you exchanged physical information.
Well, they would come in, they would copy their property cards, prepping their file. They would get the plat map. They would gather all this data. So I started looking, putting my applications in. This went on for 6 months.
Yes.
Nobody. I was about ready to give up yet again and try my hand back in the maintenance field. And I was lucky enough, one day, this appraiser came into the office every day. His name was Larry Ritter, out of Cass County, Ritter Appraisals. And he came in one day, and I was in the back room, and he walked by and he goes, "You looking for a job?" I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "Come see me Monday." Okay. I went in. We had a 30-minute conversation. He hired me on the spot, and I started following my
Great. Congratulations.
I was lucky to get a really good mentor at that time. He ran an appraisal shop there in Harrisonville that we did everything kind of basically south of Kansas City and further south. So we did a lot of farms. We did a lot of acreage. Mm-hmm. We had a commercial division, and we had a contract with U.S. Fish and Wildlife, where we'd go to Minnesota, Ohio, and do condemnation work. So I got a broad exposure, but I was in the residential side, help out with the commercial side. And, that's where I got started. This guy gave me an opportunity where nobody else will. And he was fantastic. And his son worked for him, ran the commercial side. And I think that being just around that and affiliated with that and being able to bounce ideas off of those people gave me a different perspective in appraising and a little bit different training than a lot of appraisers go through.
Yes. Wow. What a great, whether it's a real small or a bit larger community that you get to surround yourself with and be immersed in the proverbial fly on the wall, just hearing conversations, as you mentioned, people doing condemnation work in other states for one of the branches of the government. Like I said, doing acreage versus, doing commercial versus residential. I mean, similar and yet different. Wow, what a wonderful exposure.
Yeah. We once did a fish hatchery in Ohio, and we used to comp in Idaho.
That's going to blow some people's mind.
We had to fly out to Idaho to inspect this comp.
Wow.
It was, a unique time, and I got a lot of different training, I guess you will, and approaches than a lot of appraisers. So I do want to pause right here to bring up something that at this point in my career that's changed from then to now. Yeah, and I think it's important. It was unique back then because, in Kansas City area, and I assume it was like this over most of the United States, is that, you had appraisal companies, 4 or 5 appraisal companies. Mm-hmm. Most of your work was for local lenders. You didn't have the big national footprints that you have now. So they knew you, they knew the market. So when we wrote appraisals back then and communicated and everything, it was a different time because they were familiar with the market and you grew those relationships. They trusted you. I miss those times, but I understand why they changed. And I think that AMCs weren't a big thing back then. We did a little work here and there for couple, but we didn't need that work because everything was local.
I understand.
And I think that, seeing the larger banks taking over more of the mortgage industry is kind of what transitioned us into that AMC period.
Got it.
And changed the way that we had to write reports.
Got it. It's a good point. Very
because good. You're not writing for, the local person who understands the market now. I mean, parts of my career, we were doing stuff where it was being viewed, reviewed, and underwritten England. The difference in intended users, has changed significantly. So, but, I thought that important and, just kind of something as I was preparing for this to think about the things that have changed over my career.
Yes.
I worked for Larry for about 8 years, and we got to a point where I was starting my family. And, it was just not quite enough money. I hate to say that it came down to money. And Larry treated me well. I mean, he was great. But we got to a point where, it wasn't going to work. So I decided to make a change. And I was either going to go to work for somebody else that could pay more, or I was going to relocate and start my own business, somewhere else.
Oh, okay.
So I was looking at ads and I saw one for Forsyth Appraisals.
What?
They had an opening for a staff appraiser in Dallas. Okay, So I made a call, talked to the branch manager down there. We had a great conversation, but it wasn't a fit for me. And so I decided, okay, I'm going to open my own business. I was preparing. About 2 weeks later, I got a call from Al Gottschalk, the vice president at Forsyth Appraisals. And he said, hey, the branch manager called me from Dallas and said, you were somebody we wanted to talk to. I go, okay, what's going on?
Sure, let's talk. I got a few moments.
So over the course of the next about 7 months, we had several conversations, and they were looking for branch managers to open new branches throughout the country. At that time, they were expanding. They offered me a branch manager's position. The plan was I would go to Las Vegas for a year, help them. There was a branch that had been kind of faltering. They had installed a new branch manager. I'd learn the Forsyth way and go through their system for a year, understand things, and then come back to St. Louis. So went out there for a year, and that was great. Living in Vegas is so different than visiting.
It's so different because for people that haven't actually done that, I mean, there's the tourist Vegas, which is this. Even back then, there's the Strip and the energy around it. But then there's just the neighborhoods that surround the Strip, and it's like living in just about any other place out in the desert. It's hot, and there's homes, and there's a lot of air conditioning.
There's things to do around Vegas other than the Strip.
Yes.
Although when I was out there, I wasn't making a whole lot of money. I was just trying to get to the next step. And, we would go down to the Strip on Sunday afternoons with the kids. I had kids that were young at the time.
Yes.
And they had I think it was the Bellagio, had a butterfly display. And, we would do things like that. And on occasion, we would take a Friday night. We'd drive down the Strip, to see the lights,
just to see the lights.
So I'm approaching the end of my year in Vegas.
At this point, you're learning the way of the company as well as the role of branch manager. Are you also doing actual appraisals as well in the Vegas?
Yeah, I'm doing actual appraisals. This is during the big values increasing significantly, really fast, and this was 2004 that I was there. Got to know the branch manager Mark Ryan real well. We became we're still friends today. We talk on a regular basis. But I was approaching the end and was talking to Al Gottschalk, the vice president. We started talking about the potential of going somewhere else besides St. Louis.
Oh, okay.
After being in Vegas for a year with, is a completely different type of appraising with no basements, no snow.
No snow. That is a big factor for those of you on the northern part of the United States. It's called one less season.
Yes. And so he started talking about potentially Florida. They had not been in the Florida market. It was a little bit unique, and they thought I would be a good fit because I had been appraising for quite some time. I had, become a very proficient. I knew appraising. I knew how to do things, so I could concentrate more on the management side and being the branch manager down there. And, the appraisal part would come easier for me.
Yes.
So and again, kind of tripped over this. Wife and I thought about it, kind of. We knew from the second that they mentioned it, that's where we were going to go.
Oh, okay.
But we took a month to decide, and so went to Florida. And
all right.
So I ended up because Florida licensing was difficult, getting that license.
Even back then, it was difficult.
Even back then,
yeah.
Their reciprocity was difficult. I think the Florida does it because they know everybody just wants to retire, and they don't want to end up with people in their last 2 years of appraising coming down and appraising. So, so I had to send the family down because school was going to start a month before I left Vegas, and so sent them down there. So I got down to Florida, And after going from Kansas City and what I was appraising there to Vegas, I saw some definite changes. And then when I got down to Florida, it took me a couple months to acclimate to the appraising. It's so different.
What were some of the first things you experienced in terms of the difference for those that haven't had the privilege of being in any part of Florida? And there's a huge difference between northern Florida and southern Florida as well, interior versus along the coast.
Yeah, along the coastline. So I was in Orlando, and one of the most unique and first things that I realized was in Vegas, they've got, a finite amount of land, and it's compact. Mm-hmm. So, most of the lots are 4,000 square feet, and the difference between a 3,000 and a 3,500 square foot lot can be significant in Las Vegas. When I got down to Florida, I started realizing we've got more retirement communities, things like that. And I found that the lot sizes didn't, in a lot of areas, impact the value as much because you've got year-round maintenance on the lawn and people don't want to have to deal with that. So in a lot of areas, they actually prefer smaller lots so that they don't have to pay more for maintenance or mow themselves so they can get out and do things. And that was just mind-blowing to me because I came from, the lot analysis, site analysis in Vegas was, you had to, to down here where, it is what it is, So that, I think, has given me, kind of a unique perspective in appraising in different markets and seeing the differences and how drastic they could be, which made it easier for me to understand when, I've got clients from other parts of the country and trying to write appraisals for them to understand why it's important to explain some more than you normally would knowing your local market.
Good perspective there. Good perspective. Yeah. So you're acclimating to a little bit of humidity there in the Orlando market coming out of Vegas dry heat. And suddenly lot size is a little bit different of a factor.
Yeah. And that's the fascinating thing that I find, in appraising is those differences in how something is treated in one area of the country and not in the other. And down here, the designs matter too, depending on the location. So, a 2-story, great home, you got a lot of square footage, but you've got stairs you've got to go up. A lot of people don't like that down here.
Talking about that, but that's a fascinating realization for some people. Like, what do you mean you don't want stairs?
It was, and when I first lived down here and I started looking for houses and whatnot, that, I didn't think about it. But when I started appraising, then I got to thinking about, well, why are these 2 stories so different than ranches in some of these areas? I'm like, come find out, it's stairs. People don't want to carry their stuff upstairs. If the kitchen's not on the first floor, people really don't like that because, they don't want to carry their groceries upstairs. And I decided I like that idea,
All right.
I don't want to walk upstairs.
Whoa. Suddenly you become a convert. Now you have migrated over to the Florida side of things, which is ranch, or as we call them, ranch style homes, 1-level properties.
Yeah, and we fell in love with Florida.
Oh, that's great.
It was love the year round, being outside, doing things, and there's a lot to do. We live in Orlando. It was about an hour to either coast, so we could visit the beaches, once or twice a month, and we lived on the north side of Orlando, so we didn't have to deal with the Disney and all of that. It just fit us.
That's great to hear. Congratulations.
Thanks.
So how does that go? So at this point, you reached out for an opportunity. You did not get it, but because you were just open-minded and straightforward, you get a call back, and that transitions into an opportunity that ultimately gets you into a company, gets you into a market, trained up, and then you get to go open a new market. What's that like, the role of being an appraiser and taking on branch management and having to help expand a footprint?
It was difficult, but I enjoyed the challenge. I was learning a new market, but because of my background and going to Vegas from Kansas City, it was a little bit easier transition. I was on the lookout for things that would be different. And so, I was able to do that. We did a lot of review work back then, and it was a super busy time. So we had plenty of work to do. But at that time, my goal was that I had gotten to that point. I'd been appraising for, in the appraisal business for about maybe 10 years at that point. And I decided field work is not what I want to do, 100% field work for the rest of my life. I wasn't going to be able to maintain that. When I left Ritter, they were getting more into commercial.
Yes.
And I didn't want to, spend days working on a neighborhood description. Because commercial.
I mean, you didn't want to pour over the intricacies of supply and demand and growth in household income and
I didn't take any of that. And my math background kind of withheld me at that point,
Oh, okay. Well, I have heard a rumor that you have to do a little bit of math in real estate appraisal valuation. Just a little.
And I've come to really enjoy that over the years. Statistics and, just things like that.
Yes.
But at that time, I decided that's what I didn't want to be in the field for the rest of my life. So my goal was to work hard, get this built up, have people under me that are doing the work. I'm just helping them because I love appraising. I do. It's the day-to-day grind that of a field appraiser that I admire what, y'all do out in the field because I don't think that I can do it anymore.
I hear you. So, and it depends on how big the field is. Sometimes you get lost in the field because the corn's too tall. When that corn gets up to, 6-7 feet, you get lost in the field. You're like, oh my goodness, now I'm lost. Can't even get back to my own car. Kind of crazy. So
I enjoy
go ahead,
the problems. Yeah, I enjoy the problems. I enjoy working on the problems, working through those. I've got appraisers call me every day, and I enjoyed that. I enjoyed training new people. I thought about going into education, but I had a pretty good gig at the time. So I was really hire people, hire trainees, hire, newly certified people and be there for them, help them out, do appraising. But building a branch, it's a little bit slow. I had a couple of trainees and I had a certified appraiser, slowly built that branch over several years. I think at the height I had 15 appraisers working for me, but I was still doing appraisals myself.
John and Michelle, you mentioned having a team of 15. Were most of them individuals that they came into your office and the company and got trained up, or were there others that you brought over and then had to correct all their bad habits? So, what was some of that makeup?
A little bit of both.
Okay.
I had, like I say, trainees that came up through the system. I got to grow those, but then I got, a lot of appraisers come over, and I had a mix of newly certified and, some older appraisers. And I found it easier to work with the newly certified because, you've been in the profession, you do it your way. And, the working for Foresight, their way of doing business was just different. Again, I like to work with appraisers where we can sit down, have reasonable conversations and change minds. And I think that that's something that's lost from having the appraisal firms that we used to have. When you go into the office and, you run into something and you've got somebody to bounce it off of. I can't tell you how many times I'd get a reconsideration of value or something that needed to be explained, and it would offend me. And
wait, hold on. I cannot imagine that would ever happen. You got a reconsideration of value and you got offended. Rick, please tell me that's not the case.
I'm the expert. I can't be wrong. You don't know what you're talking about, Mr. Lender from New York. Whatever.
Love it.
And I would sit down, complain to somebody in the office, about it. They'd take a look and they go, well, and have a different perspective. And I'd sit back and go, wow, maybe, and learning that maybe my opinion isn't as supported as I thought it was. And I think we've lost a lot of that in our profession. I hate to see that because I think that working with other appraisers is invaluable and not just your mentor, but peers, actual peers.
It makes a difference. I still make a commitment, at least once. Sometimes it goes every 2 months instead of every month, but got to know a number of years ago, a gentleman. He's been in the profession now for like 50 years. And I just go, and sometimes it's only 30 minutes or whatever. I just happen to stop by when I'm in the area. I stop into the office. He's there like he used to be there 7 days a week. Now he's only there 6 days a week. I'm going to find him one day at the desk. It's not hard beaten, but the beautiful thing about it is with like 50 years of experience, to just sit down, like just one, kind of catching up and getting his view of the world. But then two, there's always something to talk about. Like, hey, here's an assignment I recently worked on, or because we have some specialty work that we do in property tax assessment appeal and in zoning work. And he's been around that forever. And that ability just to like, well, he's like, have you considered this? I'm like, no. I'm like, that never crossed my mind. He's like, oh yeah, I worked on something like 30 years ago. And I'm like, I've only been in the industry about like 20, 30 years. I'm like, well, it was 30 years ago. And so that beauty of being able to connect like that, it's just different in person than,
it is
email, message, or something else. That's great.
Yeah. So, if there's something to say is, partner with some local appraisers, get together, talk, have somebody to bounce ideas off of, because it's very effective.
So you're at Foresight, you're growing it. You got a team of 15. You're getting steeped in, through that period of time. It sounds like you're moving up. Did you stay with Foresight up to, through, and beyond the great financial crisis?
Yes.
Ooh,
in the
so
middle.
You're in Florida. Oh my God.
I was in Florida when it happened.
Oh.
And this is something that's unique too, because I was, I'd been out in Las Vegas that year, and I, kept in touch with the branch manager all that time. Got to know branch managers across the country. It was just amazing to see, Florida, what happened in Florida would follow what happened in California by about 6 months. And you
saw
see it rolling across the country.
Like a storm almost. Just coming across.
So I would talk to him, and I knew what was coming before it happened. So, we could get prepared for it. And it was just amazing to see that values started dropping. A few months later, our values started dropping. And then the whole dynamic as it came across, it was how things were impacted. It was, for lack of a better word, neat to see, but horrible at the same time.
Totally the case. That's the case.
So yeah, that happened, and Florida was hit hard. A new age of appraising started. And again, this is what makes appraising so fascinating, because the foreclosure started, and we got into foreclosure work. I was doing a lot of that. Enjoyed that work because it was just different. You didn't have to schedule. Homes were vacant. You didn't have the same scrutiny as you did for mortgage side. And there were plenty of cops.
Yes, sadly there were.
There were, yeah. And then as those properties started coming back on the market, selling as foreclosures, it became, understanding what was driving particular markets. And if you wanted to sell a house and it wasn't a foreclosure, in a lot of markets, you were directly competing with the foreclosures, because a lot of these properties were in nice condition. People just gave them up. They had just lost so much money. It wasn't like there was a stigma. At that time, where I was in Florida, we had a lot of investors buying.
Yes. Okay.
So as the market, started to happen, we had all these investors buying. Different attributes became important. The physical attributes of the property. GLA, it amazed me how unimportant it became.
Say a little more about that, because that's shocking for some people to hear. And
it is.
I know what you're speaking to, having been involved in that. We created a technology company that really thrived in that space. But most people they're blown away. What do you mean GLA doesn't matter?
Yeah, GLA didn't matter. It's crazy. So because we had so many investors, right?
Yes.
They were looking for a return on their investment. So when they went to purchase a property, a smaller property cost them less to rehab, but they could get the same return on it than a larger property. So it was actually safer for them to buy the smaller properties, put less of their money in, get that same return. So we were seeing GLA less and less and less and less important, because the larger the house, the more you have to invest in getting it up to speed. And, it was just amazing to see where, you'd go in, you'd pull 10 comps and you'd look at them all, and you have 600 square foot variance in GLA between them all. There was no difference in the sales price.
And did you find in that segment of the market, which I presume you did, but it's curious if you did or didn't, that it was really bedrooms first, and then bathrooms that were driving it, because that's the family unit approach. It's like, is it 3 or is it 4? Is it 2?
Yep.
1?
We saw a lot of that.
Oh, yeah. That's good.
Yeah, because, a lot of investors were buying them, fixing them up, and renting them because, people weren't repurposing them. So a lot of rental stuff too.
Yes.
So, I mean, it was just interesting to see that aspect. And again, just one more little thing that you put in the back of your brain on knowing your market, knowing your buyers and sellers. That's being in Florida, you have to know, is this a more retirement community? Is it more, a school community, things like that? Because things like bedroom count, appraisers make a $5,000 bedroom adjustment here across the board. But
a good old $5,000 adjustment. Thank goodness.
Yeah. It's way more important in a community that has a lot of children than it is in a retirement community. Past 2 bedrooms, they don't need extra bedrooms. They don't care. In a retirement, more retirement driven community, you may not see an adjustment between a 2, 3, 4 bedroom, but in a community, surrounded by school, lots of children, starter families, that bedroom adjustment may be significant. So we got through all of that, right? Mm-hmm. Again, we got to a point, Forsyth had kind of hit critical mass, right? They got to saturation point throughout the country. I love Forsyth. Don't get me wrong. They were great to me. They gave me, again, an opportunity. I'd never been a manager. I didn't know how to manage people. They gave me an opportunity that nobody else did, right?
That's fantastic.
And I got to work with, I'm going to do a shout out here, Alan Hummel.
We're happy to have him as one of our season 1 guests.
He was amazing. Probably taught me more about appraising than anything I've ever learned. I'd call him, Alan, I can't figure this out. And he goes, well, go sit your butt down on the curb across the street from that house and go sit across the street from the comp. Why would one person buy this house over this house?
Oh, fascinating. The old curb trick, it's just one of those. It's just not, you can't exactly get the same experience. Do it on Google. It's kind of close.
Yeah. But Alan, he was high energy, loved appraising, was excited about it. And so, learned a lot from him. But we got to a point where, I was like, where am I at in my career? Is there an opportunity for a next step? Is there not? And I kind of hit that mid 40s, I guess his early 40s.
Okay. Well, time flies, when you're.
Yeah, it does. But I had hit that kind of midlife crisis thing where, I wasn't sure I wanted to work for anybody anymore.
No, the same guy who got offended at a reconsideration of value? Yeah. You must be kidding me.
Yeah. So I decided I was going to go out on my own.
Oh, okay. Many people. So how'd it go for you?
It went pretty okay. Managing a business is different than running a business completely.
Say a little more about that, because I outside of the appraisal industry, I do a lot of work with owners and entrepreneurs around the country, and that is such a huge factor that until people get in the throes of it, then they're like, "Holy cow, I never saw this coming."
Well, as a manager, you do get a lot of help. Number one, you're managing people, so they're doing a majority of the work. You've got a more corporate staff that handles more of the financials, the collections, the licensing, all of that. But when you become an actual owner and you're doing it all yourself, you've got to think about taxes. You've got to think about all the resources you need. I didn't have anybody working for me, so I had to also do all the work. And all of that together, I mean, it was a huge adjustment for me and much larger than I thought it ever would be. I never did really figure out how taxes worked. I talked to some people. You can pay quarterly.
You're not alone.
I didn't know how to do any of that. So, I just put money in an account, and when it came time, I did my taxes, and whatever they said, I'd write.
Thank goodness you put money aside in an account. If there's one thing people take away from this, aside from the open-mindedness to look for what's different and go after opportunities, boy, setting some money aside just throughout the year is such a great way to get to the end of the year versus the bleep moment when you find out how much is actually due.
Yeah, because you don't realize, when you pay for your appraisal software, your MLS, your dues to any organizations, your continuing education, and you've got to track all that. I mean, there were years I'd forget about my continuing education. till, last minute. And I had to take a week off to do my continuing education the week before it expired. And, that's anytime you've got to take that time off, you're not making money. And that's the other thing is vacation. You forget about vacations because if you're not working, you're not making money. So
that is such an important highlight that people kind of miss, where it's that it's like, oh, I'm going to gain all this freedom. I don't know about you. I've never been more encumbered.
Yeah.
Than when and I've run a lot of different businesses over the last number of decades, including the appraisal firm that we continue to expand. And boy, like you said, it's a world of difference. Not always joyful.
Yeah, for sure.
But so you were making your way in the world.
Yeah, I was at Forsyth and was working and had gotten on with a couple AMCs. That was the fastest way to start getting work. A lot of my time at Forsyth was marketing, so I kind of knew what to do there. I started marketing locally, but majority of my work when I started out was AMC work, and one of the AMCs that I worked for was United States Appraisals, and they were doing a lot of REO work. And so over a period of time, I kind of got to know their staff and the people working, and they got to know me. And they were a pretty small AMC at the time. Like I said, we're doing a lot of REO work, and occasionally they'd reach out to me and ask me questions when they were having issues and whatnot. And the owner at the time, he knew, he'd heard about me and knew about me and kind of knew a little bit about my background, and they were looking for a chief appraiser. Out of the blue, I get this call, hey, we've got this position open. Would you be interested? And of course, it was back in Kansas City. So,
oh my goodness,
full circle.
Back to where it all started.
I had talked to them. I really hadn't thought about it, but then I thought, well, this is a career jump. If for nothing else, just the title, I could call myself a chief appraiser.
Congratulations. You'd be one of a small handful across the tens of thousands of people in the profession to actually ascend to that position.
But I was grossly underqualified.
It's good. Yeah, know what you're good at.
So, I had reservations, and again, we love Florida. Wasn't sure I wanted to go back to Kansas City, but I wouldn't be appraising in Kansas City. I'd be working in an office. There was no appraising with it. And at the time, my kids were getting ready to start high school.
Oh, that's a big time.
Yeah, and we decided that we would, we didn't want our kids maybe going through high school in Florida because they're like college campuses. And that small town high school experience was that me and my wife grew up with was more what we wanted. So, it was the perfect timing. My oldest was just getting ready to start high school. So we made the move and we moved back up there. So they hired me. I'd been up once to talk to them, and they said, come in. I came in. They had 2 reviewers at the time, and it was basically, yep, it's an appraisal report. It's got a sketch and some photos. Off it goes to the client. It was kind of a unique time. It was fun. And I was starting again with, kind of like what I did with Forsyth, where I started when they were small and building and building and building. And so, I came in on the ground floor. They've been open a year or 2 years prior.
Wow. So when he reached out to you, that really was early on.
Yeah. So it was, we were getting like 50 orders a day. It was a lot of fun. A lot of my first year was spent just kind of learning what they do, learning the business, learning how AMCs work, which I found fascinating. A lot of on the phone with appraisers, hey, I got this tough one. What do we do? And I fell in love with that, the helping the appraisers through the problem. Okay, I've done that part. Now I don't have to go put the rest of the report together. You do.
Got it. Yep. Love that.
Yeah, my first, 2 or 3 years there, I've probably got thousands of appraisals throughout the country with comments that I typed up.
Lots of being able to contribute. Contribution, it's a big factor there.
But and that's something I do enjoy is when I talk to appraisers is learning what they're thinking, because we're trained as appraisers, not as authors.
It's a great thing that we're trained as appraisers, not as authors.
Yeah. So what I found throughout my time is I can talk to an appraiser and pick out what they're thinking, and then translate that into something that makes sense for the reader to understand. Appraisers often most 99% of the time are right, know what they're talking about. They just can't articulate it in a way to satisfy what the client's looking. And I did a lot of help with that, my first few years. I still do today. I've got a great staff now that I've trained and said, this is what we do. Mm-hmm. We help the appraisers but that's something that I found unique in the first couple of years there. But again, another point in my career where an opportunity just kind of tripped over. And yes, when they offered it to me again, I was at that point, we knew the second they offered it, I was going to take it, but it was another month, we kind of hem-hawed around, wife and I, and, it was just another point in my career where I kind of tripped over, happened across it, just knew the right people. I hate to say that because, I'd like to say I worked really hard to get where I am, but the opportunities were put in front of me to trip over.
Rick, I think that's an important thing. And we've heard that a number of times now through season 1, and people are going to hear it from guests here in season 2 as well. And that is, the industry is definitely about your ability to perform, but it's also about your ability to work with others. And there's a component which is to be connected or related to others, and not like connected like your Facebook friend or your connection on LinkedIn, but you actually have meaningful relationship with people. And yes, you stay in touch with them to some degree. It's not like the once a year, hey, I saw that you had a work anniversary on LinkedIn. Congratulations. Hey, Facebook said it's your birthday. Happy birthday. It's like, hey, how you doing? What's going on? I haven't talked to you. What's it like in Vegas? I haven't been there in 6 months or a year, and how are things going? Then just that ability to stay in touch with people, it opens things up that would never otherwise be there because you're making an effort. And that effort is so important.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of what you're touching on right now, Rick.
Yeah. And I think the just willingness to help, to be there, and I've always enjoyed that about my career. And I've been in places where I could do that, to help people. And again, I didn't, the writing of the appraisal, I wanted nothing to do with that. I was, trying to write a neighborhood description 100 times without making a boilerplate. It was just, but getting into those situations where I could, analyze things, go through, look at different approaches. I enjoyed that, but then having to take it and put it all together was just,
that's phenomenal. So here you are kind of learning your way up in that role, and then something else opens up. What was that?
I've been with them since, Stewart purchased United States Appraisals 2.5 years ago. So I came over with them and stayed at Stewart. Unique opportunities come in front of me. I did some webinars with Fannie Mae. That was back when CU came out. Learned a lot about that. Did some joint things there. And then they called me and asked me, if I'd be interested in interviewing for position. I ended up not taking it, but it's just a lot of those things, happen. But I've been with the company now. I just hit my 10th year last month.
Congratulations.
Thank you. It's the first place that I actually hit 10 years. With Larry Ritter, I made it just over 9.
All right.
Forsyth, I was within 2 months of my 10th year.
Oh, my goodness. Wow.
I made it 10 years. And so I'm a little bit proud of that. I don't like to move around. And I would love to finish my career here. I hope that that's what I get to do.
I hope so as well. Speaking of moving around, so where are you physically at?
I'm in St. Augustine, Florida, just south.
Well, you're not in Kansas City anymore.
No. That's a little silver lining of the pandemic here. So
a helpful perspective. Share a little bit about that for those that don't know that you're not in Kansas anymore.
Yeah. So when we moved back to Kansas City, our goal was, we knew we always wanted to get back down to Florida. So, and I had talked to Aaron Fowler, our CEO at the time, and I said, hey, I want to take this position, but, knowing that I want to get back down to Florida. He goes, okay, well, we'll cross that bridge when we get there. And so we got there, and after about 2 years, my youngest had hit high school. So I told Aaron, I want a 5-year plan. Because when he's out of high school, we're going to go back to Florida one way or the other. Either I do it with the company, or I'm going to have to do something else. Mm-hmm. And he had always told me, yeah, we'll do something. We'll figure it out. Okay. You'll be with the company, taking care of me. And then in 2020, the pandemic hit. And I remember, we were in office, and that afternoon they said, gather your stuff, go home. We're going 100% remote,
Yes.
And for the last 20 years, I had been in the office. I mean, that's just what I did. So we got home, and I was afraid that with the pandemic, nobody could do anything. The market was going to crash, nothing would happen. And I'd be sitting at home for months with nothing to do. Did the complete opposite, as we know. Things took off. It was crazy. But over the next few months, we discovered I could do my job remote. I'd set this up. Everything was working just fine. So I went to him and I said, this was in August, towards the end of August. I said, hey, Aaron, I can do this remote. I don't think that I can survive a lockdown in Kansas City during the winter.
A lot of people in the United States didn't think so either there, Rick.
I was like, I would go so stir crazy, not ever leaving the house, getting off at the end of the day, and it's dark and nothing to do. I was really worried about my mental state. And he said, if you want to move to Florida now, move to Florida. And my boy had a year and a half left of school, my youngest. And so we talked to him, and he hadn't created a lot of relationships up there or anything. And he missed Florida. That's where he grew up. So he wanted to come back. So he said, let's do it. So that was in August. We listed our house, and we took till about the middle of September to list the house, get it ready to go. We listed it, got a contract within the first 2 days, and sold the house October 17th. So August, middle of August to October, we've done that. We didn't have a house in Florida. So we bought a pull behind RV, and I got in the RV, family in the RV. We came to Florida and found, a long-term thing. And I worked out of an RV. Don't tell my boss this, for 6 weeks.
Just between you and me, nobody else is going to know. Well, and everybody else that listens, but they won't really tell them either. So it's okay.
Yeah, that's fine. No, but I spent 6 weeks in the RV, working out of the RV.
Where did you put your family when you were working? You're like, you got to go out?
It was me, my wife, and my boy, and a Great Dane. She was working.
That was one of those 30-foot long RVs.
It was a 30-foot long, had two bedrooms, So, I had one bedroom, she had the other. The boy had the kitchen and living area and the dog, during that time.
Those are nice size RVs.
Yeah, it was fun. I enjoyed it for what it was, knowing that it was finite.
Yep.
And then we found a house and moved into it. I did the appraiser's golden rule. I broke it. I brought the albatross of the neighborhood.
Oh, no.
100-acre brand new development. There was one existing house on the site that is on almost an acre. Everything else is on 12,000 square foot lots. And it's 500 square foot bigger than everything else. And I bought it.
You need a place to park your RV, man.
Yeah.
I mean, you got to have space.
Yep. And I, to this day, can't tell you what it's worth. I have no idea.
It doesn't matter. That's the benefit of it all.
So, but yeah, so, we came down to Florida. I had two daughters in college down here in Flagler in San Augustine, and we've been down here several times, and we decided this is where we wanted to be. I loved it. Love it here. It's kind of a tourist city, and I really enjoy living in tourist cities. After living in Vegas and Orlando, I can basically for an evening go on vacation and go be a tourist downtown.
Hey, that's nice. And then you can make your exit and get back to your peaceful existence.
Yep.
And not be too close to your neighbors, given the size of your lot.
Yep. Yep.
Wow. What is, one of the interesting things, as you touched on, there was that opportunity for you to step up and take on that role, which you hadn't had before. What are the type of activities, more so in the last, say, several years, whether, before COVID or after, that you deal with as a chief appraiser? Because most people in the profession are never going to get to that level. And they don't really understand all the activities that go on and all the responsibilities that you bear.
So, I mean, it changes on day to day. I wear a lot of hats, and they change regularly. Now that I've got a staff of appraisers under me that deal with things, part of my time is spent on really complex issues that really need to be dive into, where we've got some title that doesn't match, a legal that doesn't jive, a property so unique that, how do you appraise that type of thing? An airplane that's been converted into a house.
Everybody wants to appraise.
Yeah. So, I work on those. A lot of compliance. There's just so many laws now that weren't there when we start. When you and I started appraising, it was kind of a
decade
wild, wild west.
That's true.
But now there's a lot of compliance and understanding the differences between, say, like the Dodd-Frank when it came out, interagency guidelines, FHA guidelines, the understanding of federally related transactions.
Sure, good old FRTs.
I'm trying to think, the CFPB. There's just so many different laws and everything, and they're all moving parts. And they all address different things, and understanding those kind of things. I deal with a lot of that. A lot of still education.
Oh, okay.
Working with appraisers and educating them on, say, unique things in the 4001, or the other thing. This is a good time to bring this up is Fannie Mae selling guide.
Yes.
A lot of appraisers don't read that. I've talked to several, and
there's actually appraisers out there that have particular what we'll properly call it parts of the assignment of their engagement that they don't actually read and don't know there's responsibility to take care of things.
Yeah, and that happens. And
shocking.
The selling guide is unique. It's this huge document that is hard to find things in. The reason how I built myself up, especially inside the company, is I became a professional Googler.
Goodness. Now, maybe you should have a little webinar. Maybe it's a CE webinar. Maybe it's not. But, the professional Googler, that's a new role that didn't exist 20 years ago.
You're right. It did not. But you can find just about anything you want about how Fannie Mae wants you to address something by just putting in the question, complex property, Fannie Mae. Usually the first or second result that comes up, it takes you to that section of their selling guide. So you don't even have to keep it up to date, because it takes you to the most current version online. And it's available to everybody. I do so much of that appraiser, how do you deal with power lines, or, what does Fannie say about this or that? You just say what you want and put Fannie Mae before or after it. It normally takes you to the selling guide and tells you how to deal with it. Mixed use properties.
Yeah. Mixed use, a big one there.
And
it's just that people don't know about.
You go through like the mixed use and you kind of remember things, but if you don't deal with it on a daily basis, you forget what they want. Yeah. So having that available where you just Google it real quick, fascinating. It works.
Wonderful. That's great. That tip alone, Rick, aside from the taxes, boy, this is just chock full of good learning today. That is definitely worth the price of admission. Good old Fannie Mae Plus in Google, all coming out. So I am thrilled to know that when my buddy James reaches out to me and asks, what's the value of Elvis's plane that he just bought? I'm telling him to call you, because he's not too far away from you there in Florida. So thank goodness you've had some experience with it, because I have had no clue.
Those kind of things are interesting. Just a quick little story. When I worked with Forsyth, I think it was maybe Cincinnati, had a high-rise, unique condo penthouse. It was the only one in the entire city that was anything remotely like that. Wow. And we worked as a collaborative together. We pulled information from, Nashville, a couple other cities, maybe St. Louis.
Maybe St. Louis. Do you have anything in Cleveland, actually?
I think that we looked at Cleveland too, and we were able to put analysis together in all these cities and take it back and say, due to lack of information we've got here, we can only tell you what happens in this, and we've got enough of these similar cities to show you that this is the most probable reaction that you're going to get. And they lined up too, between the cities. That always helps.
Always nice when the data line.
Yeah.
Like, oh wow, it made it.
Yeah. So anyway, just unique things like that.
How in your role now, as you've continued to progress, being in the what was the national expansion of foresight and being connected to all those managers around the country. And now as a chief appraiser, how do you stay in touch with peers or get connected to new peers in the role that you have? Because there's a very different set of responsibilities as a chief appraiser versus someone who's either managing an office or, just running their own appraisal firm.
Well, I keep in contact with a lot of the people that, I was peers with when I was, especially back in Foresight, the different branch managers. And I actually put it on my calendar that once a quarter, it's about time to give so-and-so a call. Yeah. Just see how they're doing. And they also know my role now. And a lot of those have their own appraisal companies now. So they'll reach out to me on a regular basis, ask me, what's going on, because in my role now, I've got a little bit more unique position in keeping my finger on the pulse of what's actually happening. I'm on regular calls with Fannie Mae in a bunch of different areas. So, we hear things and you can kind of put a map together sometimes of where the industry's going. So they'll call me, reach out, say, okay, I'm thinking about this. Is this something I need to get into? Is this the path and so they also reach out to me, getting connected to new appraisers. A lot of that happens from just going to industry meetings. My peers or my group has grown outside of appraisers, a lot of mortgage banker stuff. And, if you can get into some of that stuff, it's great. Because if you know what's happening in the banking industry, you can see what's going to happen in the appraisal industry.
Yeah, kind of like those trains coming from the West Coast to the East Coast. You see it coming.
Yeah. And those people know people. So if you're looking to move around in the industry, do things, it's not just appraisers who are going to refer you. It's going to be other individuals that you helped out in the industry. So most of that is what I do. And I'm guilty of doing a lot of my continuing education online.
Oh, no, you are. Well, I mean, they're huge advocates of it, though, Rick. I mean, you don't have to wait till the last week and take a whole week off.
Yeah.
That's a positive thing.
There are pluses to it. You can get through it quick. Don't quote me on this, but you can take a USPAP course in about half the time.
No, you've got to be kidding. You mean there isn't, 7-8 full hours of value content that come out every 2-3 years that we need to be in class for? Okay, I just double checked.
Yeah, that's accurate. But I would say that if you can take those continuing education live on site with other appraisers, that's going to be your best connections. That's going to be your, where you learn things and you'll connect with the instructor. I know several appraisers who regularly communicate with one of their USPAP instructors because, they've become, they've been to several of their courses. They've got to know them. They become friends. And it's a resource that is great to have. So,
well, you touched on two important things there. One, which is wonderful. I don't hear a lot of people do that. You actually you put it on the calendar. You make an effort to prompt yourself that, hey, when that comes up, much just like, take your car in for an oil change or hey, it's that time of year to go get the physical because, the doctor says you got to get an annual physical. But you put it right on the calendar. And then the second thing, it's just, and I very much appreciate that, you make an effort to reach out to people. Those things are significant. And you also just touched on, which is what we always love to hear as we kind of begin to wrap up. And that is, you get a sense of what's coming. Talk to mortgage bankers, talk to other people in related industries, like you said, beyond the appraisal profession. From your role where you're at, not just because you're sitting in Florida, but what do you see? What are you looking forward to? Or what do you see coming down the pipeline that may concern you? Or what has you really inspired about the future, say over the next 3 to 5 years?
This is a very controversial thing in the appraisal industry, right?
Thank goodness. And you should say it, because that's what we're here to do. Is just to bring light onto topics, and it's not about the right or wrong. It's just someone's perspective.
Yeah. Appraisal modernization. We've all heard the term, but I think it's here to stay. There is a lot of pushback from a lot of appraisers. They don't want to do this, but from my seat, what I see is, yes, a full appraisal is the standard. That's the best way to do things. But when you talk to lenders every day, when you talk to people in the industry, and you talk to Fannie Mae, they're not buying collateral, they're buying risk. And I look at borrowers and what they have to do, and having bought houses myself, sold houses myself, thinking about that, is it fair that I should have to have the top of the line Mercedes Benz to get me to Circle K down the street. Everybody doesn't need the same level of appraisal based on the amount of risk that is involved. And I think that appraisal modernization is going to address that some. There's a lot to it that appraisers are afraid it's going to take a bunch of their work. And I'm not going to sugarcoat and say it's not going to take some, but I don't think it's they're trying to push us out that everybody thinks it is. Our roles just may change a little bit. We may not be appraisers as, we thought in the past. We may be more analysts, reconcilers, reconciling data. Our roles are going to change in some aspects. The actual appraisal is always going to be needed on some properties. I mean, you just can't get away from that. But I think our roles are going to change. And for those who think that they're trying to force us out, if we as an industry take that mindset, it will happen. They're going to find an alternative if we won't participate. And whether we like that or not, I'm not going to say I'm in agreement or I'm not in agreement, but that is a fact of life. If we don't accept and try and be a part of it. And that's the other thing is, like in all these companies where I got to build from the ground floor up, I got to develop it how I wanted to do it because I bought in at the beginning. We have an opportunity as an appraisers to help shape this. We've never had a concise voice, like the National Association of Realtors, that one voice. But, we do have an opportunity here to help shape what this landscape's going to look like and what our part is going to be. And it can either be we're helping shape what it's going to be, or we're going to not be a part of it, which takes us in a completely different direction. But now for my opinion on that, I think there's a lot.
Well, what's your opinion?
I think there's a lot of benefits that give us an opportunity. Sitting in my seat again, I see things differently than a lot of appraisers. I make a lot of phone calls. Most appraisers that I call, they're out in the field, regardless of time of day. So when are they doing their appraisals? And what's the important part of the appraisal? Is it the physical inspection and gathering all that data? Or is it the analysis that goes into it? If you're doing it 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night and trying to get it written because you've already been out there and the AMC is pushing you, oh, we need this back. We know you've been out there. Are there corners being cut on that analysis?
It's an interesting approach. I mean, so as you take that look towards the future and the role that you interact with a lot of appraisers, what do you think is going to be one of the good outcomes over the next 3 to 5 years?
Well, one of the things, we hear a lot about appraisal bias. And I think, with the new hybrid bifurcated appraisal process, it's going to help limit the appraisers on that. You're not in the house. And when we talk about bias, there's more than just racial bias. I mean, you can't tell me you've walked into a house, of somebody and liked one person, in this inspection better than you like somebody over here.
Oh, yeah.
You walk in and you just hit it off with somebody. Now, are you going to?
They're just nice. Sometimes you walk in and there's just a mean hole.
Yeah.
Somebody put the wrong thing in their Cheerios, and that day it's just not going well for them, and they're not going to go well for you.
And you're a professional, so you're not going to let that impact you. But in the end, there might be, you might be a little bit more conservative on one than the other, or look at the analysis a little bit different. I think it not to make us robots, but it does give us more objectivity in, the less interaction we have with the participants and their influence on it. You walk in and a homeowner or agent hands you 4 comps, says, I want you to use these. Well, they may be the best comps, but now you're really worried about that. So maybe I don't use all of them, or, there's just so many things. So I think it'll take some of that away. And, it does provide us more opportunity to diversify. There's no reason you as an appraiser have to continue on with the valuation path. You could become the inspector path. In those, you're done when you're done. When you leave the property, you're done. Yes. So if you want to put in an 8-hour day, you're done at the end of that 8-hour day. I've done 7 of those today. I've driven all over town. I've made my, $1,500 today. And I'm done at 5 o'clock. I'm going home, spending time with my kids. Or you could do both.
We would all Well, you're going to have to share that in the notes about how we get that done, because I think that's a perspective not everybody has, and we need to find out who's paying that.
Well, and I think that right now is the time to just be kind of scoping it out. There's not enough work yet to sustain. It would be something that you would do kind of on the side as extra stuff if you're going to work towards that. But, it's an opportunity, and it's an opportunity to diversify, because those inspections happen on things where evaluation isn't. So there's going to be more opportunity there. So you could do both. Diversify your business, decide to, this next week, I just need the evenings off. I'm done with appraising, I'm stopping the valuation. I'm just going to do inspections for this week so that I can reset my batteries. I mean, there's advantages that can come out of it. Now, I think that for those that are opposed to it, if you think back to the late 90s, the 2055 was such a overused product. Appraisers did what we do. We pulled the county records, we took our exterior shot, and we threw some cops on. Well, I don't know the interior, we should have been doing more verification. And everybody says, well, see what happens when you go to that it made the market crash. It might have been a component, but it wasn't the component. But I think now with, having inspectors going out, at the very least, you're seeing more of the house than you ever saw with those 2055s. You are getting at least some perspective from a disinterested third party on the house. And with the tools we have today with Google Earth, Street Scene, these appraisals are going to be way less risk than those 2055s that we were all doing back in the 90s. I think that we're, as an industry, learning from our mistakes. I mean, really, if you want to look at what we do, we're still in our infancy of a profession. We weren't licensed till 86. That wasn't a credential.
I mean, it's an interesting approach. I know you're not good with math, but I mean, that's not too many years ago from the standpoint of existence. It's not as though it's been around for a couple 100 years. And as you touched on, there's so many possibilities that could exist going forward here. I mean, my favorite one, and maybe you have this family experience as well, is my dad is not very technologically oriented. It was hilarious when he was first learning how to use email, because thankfully, my younger brother was much better at answering his questions, because the rest of us got a little annoyed at times. And eventually he learned how to use email. And then, of course, the Facebook came out, and there's no chance he was going to use that. But you know what? Boy, he loves staying in touch with his grandkids. He knows Facebook better than I ever will. I don't spend any time on it, but if I need to know something, I just call Dad. So it's amazing how when some technology actually gets you more of what you want, suddenly it's not so offensive. Suddenly it's not so egregious. Suddenly it's not so scary. And maybe that's the future, or maybe it's not. But gosh knows, the market trends are driving that way, much kind of like you mentioned foreclosure in Florida and how hard it was hit. Sometimes you want the things and sometimes you don't. But you got to deal with the storm that you're in.
And technology, you brought that up because I find that interesting. Everybody talks about the technology changes in appraising over the years. The actual appraising is not any different than what we did. It's the report. And understanding the difference between appraisal and appraisal report, two different things.
Real quick, that's important. An important soundbite. What's the difference between an appraisal?
Yeah, the appraisal is the process. The appraisal report is the communication.
Yes.
So, I mean, there's been some changes to the appraisal form for residential appraising since I started, but anything material, not a whole lot in that presentation that goes to the client. All the technology changes have been in data gathering, the MLSs. We used to have to go and look at MLS books in the maps, put the stickers on. Everybody's heard these stories. Photos, you go to a 1 hour photo. Those are the technology changes and the changes that have happened in our industry. The actual appraisal process is still 3 comps, even though we have more data at our fingertips than we've ever had. So now it's just learning what to do with that data and better applications. And I don't know if anybody's really figured that out yet, but it's there, and those are the changes that are going to come with appraisal modernization too. So yeah, you had brought up technology.
Yeah, to know it's coming. Like you said, you get an opportunity to kind of see, you sit at a higher point, so to speak. We're we're down in the valley, you're a little bit up the mountain, so you got a little different vantage point. You can share that for those of us that may not be there, and at least help us inform, like you've done along the way. Hey, Air Force has been a great experience, traveled the world, and I'm going to do something a little different now. And hey, I was working in the county assessor office, and I was basically a property inspector, but hey, I want to do something different now. And being able to take that open-mindedness and willingness to invest in yourself and develop, I think that's wonderful to learn. And I know I have some takeaways on this as well. Man, Rick, thank you so much. This has been fantastic.
Oh, thank you. I'm an appraisal geek, and I love talking appraisals. This has been, a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. So thank you for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. It's our pleasure. We learn more by connecting with great people than scrolling through some feed. So I definitely appreciate that. Wonderful. Well, hey, Rick, I'm going to go ahead and kind of bring us towards closure here. I just want to say thank you, everybody, for joining us for another informative, engaging, and some fantastic tips there on Don't Get in Trouble with Uncle Sam from Rick there, and how to set some money aside as you go through the year. But with that, again, we appreciate your listening. We appreciate you sharing this. And every single week, we just see hundreds more people joining the community. We have several thousand people now compared to we started with nothing. And it's all because of the connection in the community. It's all about those in the valuation profession, those that are doing real estate appraisal, and those that are not, who actually, because of maybe Rick or others that have joined us, like, oh, that sounds interesting. I would like to get into this profession, or I'd like to know a little bit more about it. So we're grateful for all these perspectives to get shared every single week. And Rick, once again, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you. Really appreciate it. I had a lot of fun.
Me as well. And with that, we'll go ahead and sign off. And until our next Perusings, the Power Values podcast, have a great day and enjoy this time of year.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Perusings, Appraisers on Purpose. We hope you enjoyed learning from the amazing life paths and achievements of our guests. Don't forget to like us on LinkedIn and other podcast channels to hear more from appraisers and valuers regarding their life and their work. If you have any suggestions or questions for future episodes, we'd love to hear from you. Just send us a message on LinkedIn and we'll be sure to get back to you. Thanks again for listening, and until we're together again for the next session of Perusings, Appraisers on Purpose, create the change that you seek.